So if you don't know, you fucking should. There was a massive 7.8 Richter scale earthquake between Syria and Turkey that has killed more than 20,000 people so far, and that is going to keep going up and up and up. Those are only confirmed deaths. It was an earthquake in highly populated area with massive apartment buildings, high density. It's very bad. It's very bad. Absolutely massive fucking disaster, massive fucking tragedy. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like 50,000 plus deaths in the end. All up, probably maybe even closer to 100. So what happened after this massive earthquake is obviously there needs to be relief. But Syria is currently sanctioned by the US and I believe by the EU as well. You might feel like, oh, well, that's all well and good because Syria has a very bad man, Assad, in power. And yes, they do have a very bad man, Assad, in power. That is true. However, the sanctions don't hurt the very bad man, Assad. The sanctions hurt normal people. The way that sanctions work is, you make it hard to just have general economic activity as hard as possible for general economic activity in and out of that country to happen. Who does that hurt the most? Normal people. When the economy goes to shit, which, obviously hampering a country's ability to import and export makes it go to shit, who suffers first? Who suffered first in the 2008 financial crisis? Was it the bankers who gave out the fucking the subprime loans? Or was it you and me? Was it everyone else? It was us. So that's the same way that sanctions work. The point of sanctions is to hurt normal people, to make them suffer, to make them even more desperate than they might already otherwise be, in order to force them to overthrow the government on behalf of, in this case, the USA and the EU, to force them to get into the streets like emaciated, suffering, because they have no other option but to fight government troops with their fists and overthrow the government so that then the US can get rid of the sanctions. Basically, they are trying to weaponize the downtrodden. They're trying to make them do the US's dirty work for them under the threat of starving them, making them suffer, ruining their lives. That is what sanctions are fundamentally for. So obviously the earthquake hit Syria. For 3 days, the US maintained its sanctions on Syria after the earthquake. How many more people died than those who have already died from the US sanctions as a result of that? How many more? I'll tell you, it was a fucking lot, surely. Delaying the aid, absolutely fucking disgusting. But it continued. Because it's not just, okay, the US got rid of the sanctions, but they did so temporarily, right? And it's not just the sanctions, because the sanctions, it's not just their stated limitations that cause problems. It's also the unstated ones. If your choice is to not deal with a country like Syria, for example, which has been sanctioned before by the US, or like to try and deal with them in some way that might be legal and that might not get you in trouble, but which might carry a risk of being interpreted in an illegal way, because obviously the point of sanctions is not to do things in a consistent way or whatever. The point of sanctions is to hurt those people as much as possible. So if you're a company, say, even in normal circumstances, and say there's a medical exemption under a sanctions regime. So technically, under a medical exemption, you can apply to the US government to be allowed to deliver medicine to Syria. Isn't that just fucking dystopic? Isn't that just, even that phrase boils my fucking blood. Apply to the US government to ship medicine to Syria. But let's say you do that. Now you need to get approval from the US government, and you don't fucking know if they're going to approve you or not. You don't know if they're going to try to find some archaic random shit to disapprove it or not. Doing so puts you, even shipping shit to Syria that you technically have permission to do, puts you at risk, because there's a chance that you might get in trouble for this. So what companies do, that medical companies, food companies, whatever, in situations like this is, they say, we don't want to take that risk. It's not worth it. Syria is a poor country. It's not worth the potential headache is not worth the potential profit. It might end up costing us more. And they decide not to export to Syria, not to import from Syria, whatever, even if they might be able to get an exemption or something. Sanctions, fundamentally, even when they have these, the appearance of only being targeted at specific economic activity, having exemptions for medicine and food, etc., they still massively inhibit the ability to import or export medicine and food directly and indirectly as well, because obviously, okay, let's say for argument's sake, obviously they don't do this, but if they make cars in Syria, they need to export the cars to make money and then spend that money to buy food. Okay, you can't export the cars, there's no money anymore to buy the food. So the idea of humanitarian exemptions is in of itself a load of shit. But anyway, them even having the sanctions in the first place is a fucking travesty, and them temporarily, that good graces getting rid of them just because a disaster happened, it fundamentally shows too that they understand that these sanctions hurt normal people. Because if the argument that they use, these sanctions are not there to hurt normal people, they are there to hurt the big honchos and shit, then why would you need to get rid of them in this case? What would it do, right? They don't hurt normal people. They don't inhibit humanitarian relief. So why did you get rid of them then? It's because they actually do. They actually do hurt the normal people and their basic needs in a profound way. That's why they need to be removed in the first place, to allow the aid in. And everything I'm saying here does not just apply to Syria. It applies to Venezuela, Iran, it applies to Cuba, Afghanistan, any other country that the US is sanctioning. It doesn't matter if you think their government is bad or not, because sanctions are not about hurting the government. They are about hurting normal people and forcing them in their desperation to hurt the government, to overthrow it, you starve people so they have no other option but to confront the fucking bayonets and rifles of the government with their fists and their emancipated bodies. That's what sanctions fundamentally are. It's a fucking total joke. And this situation, makes it very obvious if the rest already didn't.